Hello, art historians. We're back with our second video uh, in later Europe and the Americas. And today we're going to be dealing with neoclassical art. So we have to think about neoclassical, classical meaning, right, classic Greece and Rome. So we're returning to those classical ideals, kind of like the way that the Renaissance returned to that. It's a rebirth of the ancient. We're going back to it again. So it's like a rebirth, a re-Renaissance, the neoclassical, the new, that's what neo means, the new classical. And so when you're looking at things from the neoclassical period, you're dealing with a lot of things that are based on ancient designs, that are based on ancient stories, that we often see a lot of influence, particularly in our architecture. And so, speaking of that, let's go to our first piece of neoclassical architecture. All right, so this is Monticello. This is Thomas Jefferson's home. Thomas Jefferson was, as you know, a president of the United States and a statesman and an inventor and a book collector and an architect. And so this is his home that he designed for himself. So the home was begun in 1768. And then he moves to France from 1784 to 1789. Then he comes back because of the French Revolution and then makes more adjustments and additions and modifications to the house from 1793 to 1809. So you're looking at a home that, grew and changed over the years. But the basic footprint of it remained mostly untouched. And when you're looking at this, hopefully you're looking at this and you're going, wow, look at that pediment. Remember, that's what this is called. Wow, look at that colonnade, a group of columns. Okay. Look at those columns. Look at that dome, right? These all feel very classical. And what you can't see from here is the dome here, the octagonal dome, even has an oculus. I mean, there's a little hole in the center at the top for the windows, right? So we're really looking at, a building that is highly, highly, highly influenced by ancient and old design. So when we're looking at the pediments and the columns, that's clearly Greek and Roman, right? When we're looking at the oculus and the dome, that's clearly Roman. Those windows, the round ones and the ones with the half moons over top of them, those are called Palladian windows. And they're named after an Italian architect, Andrea Palladio. So we see Italian influence there. The doors that open onto the patios are called French doors. They're glass all the way from top to bottom. And instead of it being a door that's just hinged on one side and opens, they meet in the middle and open out. Those are called French doors. So we see French, Greek, Roman, and Italian influence here. And why do I differentiate between Italian and Roman? I mean, ancient Roman and then Renaissance Italian. The one thing you will never see in anything designed by Jefferson is any kind of British influence. Remember, he hates the British. We separated from the British because they were terrible to us. So, Thomas Jefferson was not shy about saying he detested the English and their architecture. We see a lot of influence here from other places, but never the British. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at a house of brick, okay, and glass, stone for stairs and some other things, and wood, okay, for the roof, pediments, things like that. Okay. And so we're looking at, it's pretty tall inside. And so what you're looking at here is Monticello, which translates to little hill. Okay. So it is built it is built on a small hill, which was unusual at the time, because most houses that belonged to wealthy people at this time were built on riverbanks. Why would we build them on riverbanks? To ease our ability to import and export things from our plantation. That this was a plantation. Thomas Jefferson had slaves. He grew lots of things here. This was a working plantation. And usually when we're dealing with plantations, we're often dealing with them being built on a riverbank for ease of, transport. Thomas Jefferson did not want to build his house on a riverbank. He wanted to put it on this little tiny hill. And, so he did. And this is not what is indicative of what was typically being built in most of the country at this point, because he wanted to, build his own thing. He wanted to reflect on all of his travels. Remember, he spent time in France. He did what is often referred to as the grand tour, where you go to Europe and you see the sights or whatever. He does this after he becomes well known. And so let's look at the inside of the house. So this piece that you have here, let me just do this real quick, right? Okay. That's the west garden facade. Okay. So you're looking at, sort of the southwest portico entrance, right? Okay. Got it. Right. And then you see these beautiful areas here. Is that right? Okay. Look at this. This is what I'm trying to get at. So here you have where you would come up and you could, bring your horses or whatever and be greeted. Here are some of the places where things were grown, and some more of the places where things were grown, and some more of the places where things. So this was a working. This was a working plantation. They planted herbs and vegetables. He brought back grapevines from France and grew grapes for wine. He studied classical architecture when he was a student at William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, but he was not formally trained as an architect. He went to school at William and Mary in Williamsburg. Much of the architecture there in Williamsburg was very British, because the governor, when it was established, the governor was British. It was, named for the British. And so he really wanted something different for America and for its construction. And so when he designs his home, he designs it with a very classical thing here. We have the portico, we have the entrance hall. You come in, we have the parlor. This is where our Oculus is. Dining room, Jefferson's bedroom, Jefferson's cabinet, like a little office-y kind of thing. His library. This is the greenhouse, more library. This is just a room to meet people, another room to meet people, another room to gather and meet people, the dining room, and the tea room. Okay. And then this is how we, sort of see what we see, right? So when we enter, it is really sort of symmetrical. Like what's over here is also over here. Okay. Here we have a greenhouse. Here we have an open piazza. Okay. Here we have a portico. Here we have a portico with the parlor that sticks out. Bedroom, dining room, tea room, cabinet, library. This is the orthogonal room because it keeps that shape. This one squares off. That's why this is square and this is orthogonal. But it's pretty, symmetrical. And look at what it's titled. The location of the Venetian porch based on a house in Venice. okay, based on how those homes were built. Piazza is an Italian word. And so we see Italian influence. We see the octagonal dome here that would have been present over top of the parlor, which is where he would have had most of his gatherings. We do have these really beautiful columns here, okay, and the beautiful pediment with the square pediment behind. These are beautiful wooden balustrade on the roof that sort of tries to make it look like it's a one-story building. It's really a two-story building. There is a second floor, but this balustrade and the angle of the roof makes it look like there's really only one floor and that it has really ridiculously high rooms. We have what's called a dentil molding around here. Here's another Palladian window here, Palladian window there. So we see Italian, Greek, and ancient Roman and French influence. Okay. Now, that being said, I've meant to say one more thing. Why do we have so many windows and doors? Because you can get a breeze. It allows for circulation. Virginia in the summer can be very hot. And so with that many windows, it allows for like a cross breeze and for circulation, air circulation. There we go. All right. This is probably one of the most famous neoclassical paintings. It is located at the Louvre. It's giant. It is 11 feet by 14 feet. It's huge, right? And what you're looking at is Jacques-Louis David, that's his name. And David loved Caravaggio, loved his work, loved to study Caravaggio, huge fan of Caravaggio. And so because of that, you see all of that use of light and dark, that wonderful chiaroscuro, the wonderful shading. It's stunning. I mean, it's really a stunning use of chiaroscuro here. So when we're looking at this piece, we're thinking to ourselves that this looks very different from Rococo. And you're right, it does, okay? This is just before the French Revolution. This is French. It is a complete break with the Rococo. It was David's way of saying, this is not what we want here. We're making a switch in what our art's going to look like, and we're going to go with something that looks a little bit more like this, and we're going to come back to the classics, which is why you see the classic Roman arches behind you, okay? And you're looking at a lot of really beautiful, what's called raking light, which means it comes in from the side, like Caravaggio's calling of St. Matthew. Raking light is like stuff that comes in sideways at like an angle. It has a fancy vocabulary word that comes with it, exemplum virtuous, which means a painting with a moral. This is a painting that's supposed to teach you a lesson. It's a painting that is supposed to teach you a particular moral lesson. And so we look at the title, and there's a lot of battle over how you say this. The Oath of the Horatii is how I was taught it. Some people say the Oath of the Horatii. It doesn't matter. However you say it, that's whatever. But what we know is by giving it the title, we are able to connect it to an ancient story. And so, ready for story time, children? I always feel like I'm like a grandmother who brings the kids up around her, her rocking chair and says, gather around for story time. But here we go with story time. So it's the story of an ancient war between Rome and Alba, which is like a city-state. And what happens is, in this battle between Rome and Alba, 3 men from each of the city-states were chosen to go fight the 3 men from the other city-state, Rome versus Alba. And whoever wins this battle of 3-on-3 wins the war. And so what you're looking at here is the father sending his 3 sons to be the three that are chosen for the battle. And they are reaching out their arms to take their swords. You see 3 men, 3 women, 3 swords, 3 arches. Okay, lots of symbolism here. Now, here's the deal. These men from Rome, the Horatii, are going to go fight the other 3 men from Alba, the Curiatii. Curiatti. Okay, they're going to fight each other. Now, this is what you have to understand. There's a lot going on here. These are the Horatii. This is their father. Okay. These are the women in the background. What ends up happening in this story is that one of the sisters is married to one of the men from Alba. And so when they go off to war, here you see one sister with her 2 small children, another sister, and the 3rd sister, right? So we have 3 sisters too. And so the sister here is married to one of the men from Alba. And so however this goes for her, she loses. Either she will lose her brother or she will lose her husband. Doesn't matter. Okay? But notice where she is. Okay? She is with her family. So, what are we looking at here? We're looking at the idea that as things are getting bad in France, 1784, things are getting bad. Okay? They know the revolution is coming. The populace is unhappy. Bad things are happening around France. And so this piece is to remind you of what is going on here. This piece tells the story of this is your oath to fight for Rome, and your allegiance is with Rome, and you are to be patriotic to all things that are Rome because you are a Roman. Before any other things, your patriotism to Rome comes first. David paints this as a moral lesson, right? That exemplum virtuis, that painting with a moral. Because what he's trying to remind the populace is your patriotism and your dedication to France comes before all things. Your dedication to the nation of France comes before the aristocracy, before the king, before your own life. France is the most important thing. Think about the way we saw France personified in the Henri de Medici. The Henri receives the portrait of Marie de Medici, right? France was personified as a beautiful warrior woman. And that's kind of what David is doing here. It is that symbolism that he is saying, you must focus on your patriotism before everything else. Your allegiance is to France, and your allegiance needs to be that you will die for France if you need to, as these men are going off to die for Rome if they need to. They win, by the way, the Horatii. So they win. And so the girl loses her husband, but all 3 of her brothers live, right? So there you go. What else? There's a little bit of a sad part of the story, which I'm going to share. I was not sure whether I was going to. So the one brother kills her husband in the battle. And when he comes back from the battle, she is weeping for the loss of her husband. And she's so sad about the loss of her husband that one of her brothers actually kills her because her patriotism should be to Rome and she should be overjoyed at the win by Rome, and she isn't. And so he actually kills her. That's the story. It's very sad. So There is a thing called the Salon, Salon, where paintings in France were shown. And if your painting was shown at the Salon and people liked it, there was a Salon every year. It was like a kind of like a almost like a here's the best art of France. And it was very hard to get your work into the Salon. And then people would come and look at the work in the Salon. And if you were selected to show your work, you suddenly had a lot more work because people said, oh, this is the best in France. And so this was shown at the Salon in 1785. And people just loved it. They were like, this is so great. So this is one of those paintings, unlike, like we talked about the Venus of Urbino, which was incredibly controversial, and some other pieces that we've done that were sort of controversial. This one was loved from the beginning. So that is this piece. Okay. That's going to move us on to our third neoclassical piece. And this is an American neoclassical piece. And this is a statue of George Washington. Okay. And so what you're looking at is a piece that was commissioned by the Virginia General Assembly, like the Virginia legislature. And they wanted a piece of statue. They wanted a statue of George Washington to keep in the Virginia, basically the Virginia State House. And they wanted to I guess, to honor George Washington, right? So we have to think a little bit about our timeline here, okay? When we're looking at this, George Washington becomes president in 1789. Okay. He had, at this point, won the war, and he becomes president. He leaves office in 1798, but he was the commander of the, what do we call it? The commander of the Continental, commander of the Continental Army. I was about to say the Continental Congress, but no, the commander of the Continental Army. And so, and he was also a delegate at the Continental Congress. So he was really involved in a lot of things that were going on. And so when we're thinking about, George Washington, we often think about, we think about him in this great, he's this great soldier, right? And when you think about it, his soldiering ended in 1783. And while he helps to move things along, we get down to the point that we have a president, not until the 1789 he becomes president. And so, he's involved in a whole lot of stuff between those two periods. And what we have to remember is what happens in those years in the interim, right? And so what happens is in the early republic, from that time, that's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it the early republic. And it is that time from 1783, when the war is over, until 1789, when he becomes president. In that time, that early republic, George Washington goes back to Monticello. Okay? I just said Monticello. He goes back to Mount Vernon. That's his name of his house. He goes back to Mount Vernon. And he goes back and he becomes a farmer again. right? And he is elected president, but he didn't really like, it was hard for him, right? Watch the musical Hamilton. You'll know what I'm talking about. And so what happens here is they know that he is going to become president. And so the Virginia General Assembly wants to have this statue made because they know that their guy from Virginia is going to go to Washington. Well, is going to go to the Capitol, New York, I think, is going to go to the Capitol, and he's going to be the president, right? And so they want to honor him, and they want to be like, hey, Luke, that's our Virginia dude that's up there leading the whole country. So the governor of Virginia just says, okay, we gotta do this. And he talks to Thomas Jefferson and says, look, we want to do this. And Thomas Jefferson says, look, man, I'm gonna tell you honest. There is not a single sculptor in all of this country that can do what you want them to do. We don't have the skill here. And why is that? Because we haven't been putting out artists in the colonies, now United States of America. We've been at war, right? We haven't been making artists. We've been making, statesmen and soldiers. We haven't been making artists. And so Thomas Jefferson says to them, look, there's literally no one in all of America that can do this. And they're like, well, what do we do? And so they get in touch with this painter. His name is Charles Willson Peale, very, very famous. He did the most famous painting of Washington that exists. So they get in touch with Peale, and Peale draws a portrait, like a picture, but not a fully detailed portrait, but like a pretty good detailed, like just kind of like this. And they take that portrait and they sail it over to France. And they deliver that portrait to Jean-Antoine Houdon. That's how you say that, Houdon. Because Houdon was the most famous and accomplished sculptor in France at the time. And the French were like super in love with the Americans because we did that whole revolution thing, which made them think that they could do the whole revolution thing. And, so they want to help us out. So Houdon begins to make this sculpture. And as he's beginning to make the sculpture, he is like, I just don't feel right about this. So Houdon gets on a boat, sails from France to Virginia, takes measurements of George Washington, makes what's called a life mask of him, which is basically like a plaster cast of your face, and then sails back to France and completes this statue in France. And then when it's done, it's held over in France for a little bit. He finishes it in 1792. But the state house, the state capitol in Virginia, Capitol building, wasn't done until 1796. So that's when it's actually moved from France to Virginia. So what's going on in this? So now you get the history of what we're looking at and all of the cool stuff that goes around with it. But what's going on in this piece? Well, there's a lot of cool stuff happening here. So you're looking at Washington. And one of the things that you have to know about George Washington is he absolutely insisted that he never be referred to by any terms as far as gods go or royalty. He really was not down with that. He liked the idea of president. He wanted to make sure that people didn't get kind of too wacky and try to make him look like he was more than he was. There's a very famous painting of George Washington in the middle of the National Capitol building that's called the Apotheosis of Washington, which literally shows George Washington as a god, and George Washington would have been furious about that. And he was very clear with Houdon when he met with him that he would not be shown wearing anything Greek or Roman, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to put him in a toga. So there's a sculpture of George Washington at the American History Museum where he's in that sort of Greek toga. He would hate that too. He demanded that they show him in contemporary clothing. And so that's what you see here. But when you're looking at him, I want you to notice a couple of things, okay? Because the imagery here is super, super important, okay? He has on his military jacket. Okay, so that's what you see here. This is the lapels of his military jacket. And underneath he has a vest. And I want you to look at the fact that his vest looks a little tight. Why is that? Well, he's got a little bit of a tummy there. He's got a little bit of a pudge. Why is that? Because he doesn't have to be in tip-top fighting condition. He's back at Mount Vernon being a farmer. Right? He's missing a button on his jacket. One of the buttons here, you can't see it really in this picture, but there's a button missing. He has a little pudgy around the middle, right? He looks comfortable. He looks retired, right? He's retired from fighting. And what you see here is while he has on his military jacket, it doesn't quite fit him anymore. And instead of the sword, there's his military sword that would usually be hanging from his waist. It's over here hanging off in a pile. And what he has is a gentleman's walking stick. Okay, so we just get these ideas that they're trying to show him the past was his military, but he is returning to his life as a farmer. Behind him, that's a plow. Okay, there's a plow back here behind him, reminding us of his farming. But this thing that looks like a column is actually, it's a bundle of 13 rods. It's called a fasces. And it's a bundle of 13 rods. And each one, why is there 13? Because there's 13 original colonies, so 13 states, right? So, but the military stuff is over there on that. To separate the gentleman farmer, the plow is behind him. He's going back to Mount Vernon to plow. The plow is behind him. He's got his little tummy. He's got his gentleman's walking stick off to the side, to the left, where it's not going to do him any good, right? Because you don't sword fight with your left hand. Off to the left is his sword, right? His military stuff. And on his belt, that you can't really see because it's over here, it's hanging, there is this little, it looks like a little badge. And it's, you don't need to know what it looks like, but it is what is called the badge of the Cincinnatus. And it is a group of men who the Cincinnatus is it's a group of men who were soldiers and get together after and celebrate their camaraderie. There's still an active group of the Cincinnatus. If you can trace your family back to someone that participated in the Revolutionary War, you can become a member of the group of the Cincinnatus. So who is Cincinnatus? Well, Cincinnatus was this really cool guy who, in ancient Rome, here we come back to our ancient Rome and see our column there and see our marble, right? So in ancient Rome, Cincinnatus was a farmer. And then Rome went to war with, I don't remember at the moment who they went to war with, but Rome went to war and they called on Cincinnatus and said, we need you to lead troops. And so he left his farm and he led the Roman troops and he was a commander and he was this amazing general and he killed all the bad guys and won all kinds of cool stuff for Rome. And then when it was done, when he retired, he went back to his farm and continued to be a farmer. He didn't stay in the army. He didn't benefit off of all of this power. He was a farmer, then he was a soldier, and then he was a farmer again. And that's what they want to portray with Washington. He was a farmer, and then he was a soldier, and now he's a farmer again, because that's what Washington wanted you to focus on. He didn't want you to think of him as a king. He didn't want you to think of him as a someone that had a lot of power. It was about our country and not about the power, which is why, he left after. I mean, he could have stayed and been king. He really could have. He could have stayed the president for forever. But he believed that there should be a peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next, and there should be elections, and we should be, a representative democracy, like all of these things. So, a republican democracy. There we go. A republic. We're not a democracy. We're a republic, right? Brain is on vacation, man. So that is neoclassicism. That is our second video in late Europe. I hope that you learned some cool things today about French history and American history and Roman history, and I'll see you next time.